Europe, wake up. Immigration, assimilation, and the last warning from Poland. There are episodes I prepare because I want to comment on politics. And then there are episodes I prepare because I feel that if we do not speak now, if we keep pretending, if we keep using soft words for hard realities, then very soon we may not be able to speak honestly at all. This is one of those episodes. Today, I want to talk about immigration, assimilation, Europe, Poland, Britain, violence, cowardice, and the moral collapse of institutions that were supposed to protect ordinary citizens. And before anyone reaches for the easiest insult in the book, let me say this clearly. I do not care about skin color. I do not care whether someone is black, white, brown, Asian, Arab, African, Indian, Ukrainian, Vietnamese, Muslim, Christian, atheist, or anything else. That is not the point. The point is the contract. If you come to a country, you enter a house that already exists. That house has a language. It has laws. It has customs. It has memory. It has wounds. It has traditions. It has symbols. It has a moral order. And it has a people who built it, defended it, inherited it, and who have every right to decide what kind of future that house will have. Immigration is not a right to redesign the host nation against the will of its people. Immigration is not a license to import parallel laws, parallel loyalties, parallel moral systems, or parallel territories. Immigration is, first of all, a request to enter, a request to stay, a request to become part of something that existed long before you arrived. And if you are accepted, that acceptance comes with duties. Not symbolic duties, not decorative duties, real duties. Learn the language, respect the law, respect the host culture, respect the women, the children, the elderly, the police officers, the soldiers, the teachers, the doctors, and the workers of the society that received you. Do not bring here the violence you claim to have fled. Do not bring here the tribalism you claim to have escaped. Do not bring here religious intimidation, clan pressure, sexual exploitation, hatred of the host country, contempt for women, contempt for free speech, or contempt for the law. Because if you bring those things with you, then I have one very simple question. Why did you come? If Europe is only a better funded version of the failed places you left behind, what exactly is the purpose of your migration? If you come to safety but you recreate danger, what are you asking us to accept? If you come to freedom but you try to impose fear, what are you really seeking? If you come to a country of laws but you demand exceptions for your culture, your community, your religion, or your group identity, then you are not integrating. You are colonizing space inside another nation's body. And that is where Europe has been making its deepest mistake. not because it accepted foreigners. Foreigners are not the problem. The problem begins when a state accepts people without demanding loyalty. The problem begins when a state confuses compassion with surrender. The problem begins when criticism of behavior becomes forbidden, because the person behaving badly belongs to a minority. The problem begins when the word racism becomes a shield for criminals and a weapon against victims. That is what this episode is about. Not hatred, not revenge, not collective blame, but law, order, assimilation, national dignity, and a warning. Europe, wake up, because the clock is almost out. The contract. Let us begin with the idea of the contract. When a migrant enters a country, especially a country like Poland, France, Britain, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Sweden, or any other European nation, he does not enter a blank piece of land. He enters a civilization. And civilization is not just buildings, roads, schools, hospitals, and welfare systems. Civilization is also invisible. It is the way people queue, the way they speak to women, the way they treat children, the way they disagree, the way they respond to criticism, the way they understand authority, the way they treat religion, the way they treat the police, the way they treat the law, the way they understand the difference between private belief and public coercion. A person who comes to Poland should understand something very simple. You are not coming to a hotel. You are not coming to a benefits office. You are not coming to neutral territory. You are coming to Poland. And Poland is not an administrative unit. Poland is a nation, a language, a memory, a culture, a historical wound, a stubborn survival instinct. A country that was erased from the maps and survived anyway. In language, in family, in literature, in faith, in custom, in resistance. Poland has lived with minorities before. Jews, Tatars, Armenians, Germans, Lithuanians, Ruthenians, Karaims, Scots, Italians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and others. The old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was not a modern nation-state in the narrow ethnic sense. It was broad, multi-layered, complicated, and yes, imperfect. But there was one thing it understood better than much of modern Western Europe. There must be a shared order. You may have your customs. You may have your private faith. You may have your family memory. But you do not get to build a state within the state. You do not get to demand that the host nation erase itself to make you comfortable. You do not get to tell the majority that its own land must now become neutral ground. That is why I believe in conditional migration, a trial period, a probationary contract. You come legally, you work or study, you obey the law, you learn the language, you respect the culture. You accept that Polish law is supreme in Poland. You raise your children to see Poland not as enemy territory, not as a convenience, not as a welfare machine, not as a place to exploit, but as their country, their home. their responsibility. And let me be very clear. I do not mean that a child must forget the language of grandparents. I do not mean that family memory must be burned. I do not mean that private religion must be erased. A person can know two languages. A family can remember where it came from. A home can keep its food, its songs, its stories, and its memories from another place. That is not the problem. The problem begins when the host country never becomes the primary loyalty. In Poland, the public language must be Polish. The civic loyalty must be Polish. The law must be Polish. The cultural frame must be Polish. Not because Polish blood is magical, not because ethnicity is sacred, but because a nation cannot survive if it becomes embarrassed by its own center. Citizenship should not be an automatic reward for time spent on a territory. Citizenship should be a prize for integration. You prove that you belong. Then the state opens the deeper door. But if you break the contract, if you commit serious crimes, if you threaten public safety, if you try to impose extremist ideas, if you participate in organized violence, sexual exploitation, religious intimidation, or attacks on officers and soldiers, then the answer should be equally clear. You lose the privilege of staying. You face the law. And if you are not a citizen, and the law allows it, you are removed. No endless theater. No bureaucratic fog. No cowardice. No emotional blackmail. A serious state must be able to say both things at once. Welcome to those who respect the house. Goodbye to those who attack it. Britain as a warning. Now let us speak about Britain. Because if Poland needs a warning sign, Britain may be one of the clearest. I say this with sadness, not pleasure. Britain is a great country. It gave the world extraordinary literature, parliamentary tradition, common law, humor, music, science, courage in war, and a language that now carries much of the modern world. But something has gone terribly wrong. And what has gone wrong is not simply immigration. That answer is too simple. What has gone wrong is the ideological capture of institutions. A society can survive immigration if it has strong institutions, clear expectations, moral confidence, and the courage to enforce the law. But if a society combines mass migration with institutional cowardice, fear of being called racist, weak borders, weak deportations, parallel communities, and a political class more afraid of headlines than of dead citizens, then disaster becomes predictable. Let us speak about recent cases. In Belfast, in June of 2026, a man named Stephen Ogilvy was brutally attacked with a knife. The suspect, Hadi Al-Odid, a Sudanese man, was charged with attempted murder. The victim suffered life-changing injuries, including the loss of an eye. Afterwards, Belfast erupted. Anti-immigrant violence broke out. Homes and vehicles were attacked. Ethnic minorities who had nothing to do with the crime were targeted. The victim's own family appealed for calm. And here is the uncomfortable truth. I understand the anger. I do not support the violence. Those two statements must stand together. If you only condemn the riot and refuse to discuss the original crime, you are lying by omission. If you only discuss the crime and excuse mob violence against random families, you are abandoning justice. A serious state must do neither. A serious state must say, the attack was monstrous. The suspect must face justice. The public has the right to ask how this happened. And no innocent family should be attacked because of the ethnicity, religion, or migration status of a criminal suspect. That is the line. Law, not mob revenge. Justice, not collective punishment. But also truth, not suppression. Now consider another case. Henry Novak, an 18-year-old student in Southampton. Stabbed, dying, handcuffed by police after his killer falsely claimed that Henry had racially abused and assaulted him. Think about that. A young man is dying on the ground. He says he has been stabbed. He says he cannot breathe. And the system, trained to respond instantly to the accusation of racism, treats the dying victim as the suspect. This is not simply a policing error. This is a civilization error. It shows what happens when institutions become morally disoriented. When the fear of a racism allegation overwhelms the most basic instinct, protect the wounded. When an accusation becomes stronger than blood on the pavement. And again, let us be precise. This does not mean that Sikhs are the problem. That would be absurd and unjust. Millions of Sikhs are peaceful, hardworking, loyal citizens in many countries. The problem is not a whole group. The problem is a system in which identity can distort institutional judgment. The problem is a police culture so terrified of one kind of accusation that it can fail in its most basic duty. Save the victim first. Then there are the grooming gangs. For years, girls were exploited, raped, abused, degraded, and abandoned. Not by one man, not in one town, not in one isolated scandal, but through patterns that authorities often fail to confront with full honesty. And one of the most poisonous elements in that failure was the fear of discussing ethnicity, culture, religion, and group dynamics. That fear did not protect minorities. It protected predators. It protected institutional reputations. It protected careers. It protected political narratives. It did not protect children. Let that sentence stand. It did not protect children. And any system that protects its image more fiercely than it protects children has lost moral authority. I am not saying that every member of any ethnic or religious minority is responsible. Of course not. Collective guilt is evil. But collective silence can also be evil. And when institutions avoid patterns because those patterns are politically uncomfortable, They become collaborators in denial. That is what people see. That is why anger grows. That is why trust collapses. And that is why, when another crime happens, people no longer believe the official language. They assume something is being hidden. Sometimes they are wrong. Sometimes rumors are false. Sometimes the internet lies. But why do they believe the rumors so quickly? Because for years, institutions taught them that uncomfortable facts would be softened, delayed, buried, or morally reframed. Trust dies slowly, then all at once. Parallel law. There was also the phenomenon of the so-called Muslim patrols, Sharia patrols, in parts of London years ago. Groups of men were confronting people in public, objecting to alcohol, objecting to clothing, objecting to couples holding hands, trying to impose religious behavior in public space. Were these groups representative of all Muslims? No, absolutely not. Many Muslim communities condemned them. But were they a warning sign? Yes, a massive one. Because the issue is not how many men were involved. The issue is the principle. In a European country, no private religious group has the right to patrol the streets and tell citizens how to dress, drink, walk, love, speak, or behave. That authority belongs to the law, not to clerics, not to gangs, not to self-appointed moral police, not to men who believe their religion gives them jurisdiction over strangers. Freedom of religion means you may live by your faith. It does not mean you may enforce your faith on others. And here is where Western Europe made a deadly mistake. It became too afraid to defend its own norms. It confused tolerance with permission. It confused diversity with surrender. It confused sensitivity with paralysis. And the result is that in some places, the majority began to feel like a guest in its own country. That is not sustainable. No society can survive if ordinary citizens feel that their own customs are negotiable, but imported customs are untouchable. No society can survive if native citizens are told to adapt endlessly, while newcomers are not required to adapt meaningfully. No society can survive if criticism of bad behavior becomes taboo whenever the offender belongs to a protected minority. The sentence should be simple. Bad behavior is bad behavior. A knife is a knife. A gang is a gang. A rape is a rape. A threat is a threat. A religious patrol is a religious patrol. A crime does not become less serious because the criminal has a politically sensitive identity, and a victim does not become less worthy because the offender belongs to a minority. Poland and the border. Now let us return to Poland, because some people in Western Europe love lecturing Poland. They lecture us about openness. They lecture us about tolerance. They lecture us about borders. They lecture us about moral duty. And yet, when we look at the disasters unfolding in parts of Western Europe, perhaps it is time to ask a different question. Maybe Poland should not be learning helplessness from the West. Maybe the West should be learning seriousness from Poland. In 2024, a young Polish soldier, Mateusz Sitek, died after being stabbed at the Polish-Belarusian border. He was defending the border of Poland, the border of the European Union, the border of the legal order itself. He was attacked in the middle of a hybrid operation, an operation in which the Belarusian regime weaponized migration pressure against Poland and against the European Union. And after such tragedies, we still hear endless hesitation. Should soldiers be allowed to defend themselves? Should border guards use force? Should the state stand behind them? What kind of question is that? If the state sends a soldier to defend the border, the state must give him clear legal protection, clear rules of engagement, and the confidence that if he acts lawfully in defense of life and border security, he will not be sacrificed later to political theater. This does not mean shooting randomly. This does not mean brutality. This does not mean abandoning the law. It means the opposite. It means clear law, clear authority, clear responsibility. A border that cannot be defended is not a border. A state that cannot defend its border is not fully sovereign. A government that sends men into danger and then leaves them legally uncertain has failed them. And there is another case that must be mentioned here, because the tragedy of Mateusz Sitek was not the only moment when Poland had to ask itself whether the state truly stands behind the men it sends to defend the border. In 2024, Polish soldiers were detained after firing warning shots near the Polish-Belarusian border during an incident involving people attempting to cross illegally from Belarus. Some of them were treated not like men performing a dangerous state mission, but like suspects who had somehow forgotten their place. And this is where the question becomes even deeper. What exactly do we expect from a soldier at the border? Do we expect him to stand there as decoration? Do we expect him to wait until the threat becomes fatal? Do we expect him to defend the border, but then punish him for using the tools that make defense possible? A soldier is not sent to the border to participate in political theater. He is sent there because the border is real, because the threat is real, because the state has a constitutional duty to defend its territory. And if the state gives a man a uniform, a weapon, and an order to protect the border, then the same state must not later treat him as a criminal for doing what that mission logically requires, provided he acts within the law. This is why the later court decision in Lublin mattered so much. When the military garrison court acquitted the soldier accused over the border shooting case, it did more than decide one man's fate. It restored a basic principle. A soldier defending the border is not automatically a suspect because he uses force. A warning shot is not automatically a crime. The use of a weapon in a border crisis must be judged seriously, legally, and carefully, but not through panic, ideology, or political cowardice. And that is exactly how a healthy state should work. If a lower level of the state makes a mistake, if prosecutors overreach, if institutions panic, then the courts must have the courage to restore balance. Not by giving soldiers a blank check, not by saying that every shot is justified, but by saying that the defense of the border is not a theoretical slogan. It is a real duty, a dangerous duty, a constitutional duty. And men who perform that duty lawfully must not be abandoned. Because once soldiers begin to fear their own prosecutors more than the aggressors in front of them, the border has already been weakened. Not by migrants, not by Belarus, not by Russia, but by the state's own uncertainty. And that must never happen again. Poland must not apologize for defending its border. Poland must not apologize for expecting assimilation. Poland must not apologize for saying that Polish law is supreme in Poland. Poland must not apologize for refusing the Western European model of guilt-driven surrender. And Poland must not become arrogant either. We are not immune. We are not magically protected. We are not morally superior by blood. We can make the same mistakes if we become careless. That is why we need a serious model now. The Polish model. So, what should the model be? Here's my answer: conditional migration, controlled migration, assimilation based migration, lawful migration, migration that serves the host society and does not blackmail it. First, legal entry. A state must know who is entering, why they are entering, where they are staying, and whether they have the right to remain. Second, probation. No automatic deep membership. A person should first prove stability, legality, work, education, language learning, and respect for public order. Third, language. In Poland, Polish must be the language of public loyalty. If you have lived here for years and still cannot function in Polish, something has failed. If your children grow up here and do not feel Polish as their civic identity, something has failed. Fourth, law above culture. No tradition, no clan, no family pressure, no religious rule, no imported honor code, no community leader, no foreign conflict stand above Polish law. Fifth, no parallel societies. No unofficial religious patrols. No ethnic intimidation. No our streets, our rules. No areas where women feel unsafe because they dress differently. No schools where teachers are afraid to teach honestly. No neighborhoods where police hesitate because of community pressure. Sixth, citizenship as a reward. Citizenship should come after proof, after years of lawful behavior, after language, after cultural and civic knowledge, after integration. It should not be a stamp given because the bureaucracy got tired. Seventh, removal after betrayal of the contract. If a non-citizen commits serious violent crime, participates in extremism, attacks officers, engages in organized sexual exploitation, or threatens public security, then the state must have the capacity to remove him where legally possible, and to isolate him where removal is not possible. And yes, this must be done as a state, not as a mob, not as revenge, not as collective punishment, not as hatred. The goal is not violence. The goal is order. The goal is not humiliation. The goal is security. The goal is not ethnic purity. The goal is civic loyalty. The inverted contract. And now I must add something that many politicians prefer not to say out loud. Because the betrayal of the contract does not only happen on the side of the newcomer. Sometimes it happens on the side of the state. In some Western European countries, citizens have watched something they can barely believe. They have watched newcomers, people who arrived yesterday, people who have never paid a single year of taxes, people whose claims have not even been verified, receive accommodation, allowances, and assistance faster and more easily than the citizens whose families built and funded those very systems. They have watched hotels filled at public expense while their own people wait years on housing lists. They have watched homeless veterans sleep on the streets of cities that found beds, meals, and money for those who crossed the border last week. They have watched young working families told there is no housing, no support, no priority for them, while the system bends over backwards for people with no documented ties to the country at all. Think about what that does to a society. A citizen works. He pays taxes for 20, 30, 40 years. He follows the rules. He asks for nothing. And when his life collapses, when he loses his job, his home, his health, he stands in the same queue as everyone else, often at the back of it. Meanwhile, the newcomer, who has contributed nothing yet, who has proven nothing yet, is moved to the front. Not always, not everywhere, but often enough that ordinary people have noticed. And ordinary people are not stupid. This is the inverted contract. The original contract said, contribute first, then receive. Prove loyalty first, then enjoy membership. The inverted contract says arrival itself is a claim. Need declared at the border outweighs decades of quiet contribution. And let me be honest about who is to blame for this. Not the migrant. A man who is offered a free hotel room does not write the policy. A family that is given an allowance does not design the welfare system. The blame lies with the states that built these incentives, with the politicians who decided it was easier to spend money than to enforce borders, with the bureaucracies that treat the verified citizen with suspicion and the unverified newcomer with generosity. But understand the consequence. Nothing destroys social peace faster than the feeling that loyalty is punished and arrival is rewarded. Nothing radicalizes a calm, ordinary, law-abiding citizen faster than the sight of his own state treating him as second in line in his own country. You cannot tax a man his whole life, tell him there is nothing left for him, and then show him the bill for someone else's hotel. That is not solidarity. That is provocation. So the principle must be restored, and it must be said without shame. A state's first duty of care is to its own citizens, to the people who built it, who funds it, who defends it, who have nowhere else to go. Help for newcomers, yes, where it is deserved and where it is lawful, but conditional, temporary, tied to verification, to legality, to integration, and to work. Never automatic, never superior to the rights of citizens, and never financed by humiliating the very people whose loyalty holds the country together. Because a state that takes its citizens for granted will one day discover that their patience, like their taxes, was not unlimited. Why the West failed. Western Europe did not fail because it became diverse. Diversity is not automatically failure. Western Europe failed where it lost the courage to demand a shared center. It failed where the majority was told to endlessly accommodate, while newcomers were not clearly required to assimilate. It failed where institutions treated criticism of minority behavior as more dangerous than the behavior itself. It failed where police, councils, media, charities, and politicians became more afraid of accusations than of victims. It failed where deportation became theoretical. It failed where borders became symbolic. It failed where integration became a slogan. It failed where welfare became unconditional and citizenship became meaningless. It failed where multiculturalism meant that every culture must be respected, except the host culture. That last point matters. because a healthy country can respect minorities, but a suicidal country respects minorities by erasing itself. A healthy country says, "You're welcome here, if you respect us." A suicidal country says, "We will change ourselves until you no longer feel any pressure to change at all." That is not compassion, that is abdication. And ordinary people see it. They see the double standards. They see the fear. They see crimes softened by language. They see victims treated as politically inconvenient. They see protests condemned faster than the conditions that created the protests. They see politicians offering sympathy after each tragedy, but no structural change. And then the elites wonder why people become angry. Let me say this carefully. I do not support riots. I do not support mobs. I do not support attacks on innocent people. But I understand why people explode when they believe the state has stopped listening. That understanding is not approval, it is a diagnosis. If a doctor says he understands why a wound became infected, he is not praising the infection. He is explaining the failure that allowed it. The line between justice and hatred. This episode would be dishonest if I did not draw a hard line. There must be no collective blame. A peaceful migrant is not guilty because another migrant committed a crime. A Muslim doctor is not guilty because an Islamist murdered someone. A Sikh shopkeeper is not guilty because a Sikh criminal killed Henry Novak. A Sudanese family is not guilty because a Sudanese suspect was charged in Belfast. A child is not guilty because adults failed. If we abandon individual responsibility, we become unjust. And if we become unjust, we destroy the very civilization we claim to defend. But individual responsibility does not mean institutional blindness. We must be able to say both things. No collective guilt, no forbidden patterns, no hatred of innocent people, no silence about dangerous networks, no racism, no cowardice, no mobs, no denial. That is the mature position. It will satisfy neither the extremists nor the professional deniers. Good. A serious society must disappoint both. Answering the critics. Now, before I turn to Western Europe directly, let me do something that commentators on this topic almost never do. Let me answer the critics, honestly, without strawman. Because I know exactly what will be said about this episode, and I would rather face those arguments here, in the open, than pretend they do not exist. First objection. Migrants do not actually have priority over citizens. In most European countries, the law does not put newcomers ahead of natives in welfare or housing. The hotels exist because states are legally obliged to accommodate asylum seekers while their claims are processed. And you know what? On paper, that is largely true. I will not lie to you and claim there is a secret law that says foreigners first. There is not. But listen carefully to what that defense actually admits. It admits that the state has built for itself a binding legal obligation to house, feed, and fund a person who arrived yesterday and whose claim has not been verified, while it carries no equivalent binding obligation toward its own homeless citizen, its own veteran, its own young family on a 10-year housing list. That structure, that asymmetry of obligation, was a political choice. Nobody voted for it by name, but somebody designed it. And when the man on the street sees a hotel full tonight, and his neighbor on the pavement tonight, he does not care whether the cause is a statute, a treaty, or a court ruling. He sees the outcome, and the outcome is the message. Formal equality on paper, inverted priority in practice. So no, I do not claim there is a law that favors the migrant. I claim something worse, that states voluntarily bound their own hands in one direction and left them free in the other. Fix the structure of obligations, and this argument between us disappears. Second objection. Crime statistics. When you control for age, sex, and income, the differences between migrants and natives shrink. Most migrants commit no crimes at all. Two answers. The first, of course most migrants commit no crimes. I have said it in this episode again and again. No collective guilt. The peaceful majority is real, and it deserves to be defended. First of all, from the criminals inside its own communities. But the second answer is this. Controlling for variables is the language of analysis. It is not the language of policy. A researcher controls for age and poverty to understand causes. A state does not get that luxury, because a state chooses whom it admits. If you choose to admit, in huge numbers and without selection, exactly the demographic profile that every criminologist on earth associates with elevated risk, young, male, unattached, economically marginal, then you have not discovered an inequality, you have imported a risk profile. Knowingly. And one more thing. The public anger in Britain was never really about averages. It was about patterns that institutions saw and buried. You cannot calm a society with a regression table after it has watched its own officials look away from raped children. Statistics answer questions of scale. They do not answer questions of betrayal. Third objection. Europe is aging. We need migration. Without newcomers, who will work? Who will pay for the pensions? Who will staff the hospitals? This is the strongest argument the other side has. And here is my answer. I agree. You heard that correctly. I agree that an aging Europe needs people. But notice what that argument actually supports. It supports exactly the model I described in Act 5. Selective migration, legal migration, work-based, language-based, integration-based migration. The nurse who learns the language and takes the oath, that is the answer to demography. The engineer who pays taxes and raises his children as citizens, that is the answer to demography. An unvetted young man in a hotel, forbidden to work or unwilling to, is not a pension contribution. He is a cost, fiscal, social, and political. So do not use the hospital nurse to defend the street gang. They are not the same person. They are not the same policy. And a serious country knows how to want one and refuse the other. Message to Western Europe. And now to Western Europe. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, and every country that still thinks it has time. Look at Poland. Not because Poland is perfect. We are not. We have our own stupidity, our own political chaos, our own corruption, our own divisions, our own historical wounds. But in one thing, Poland still has an instinct that many of you have almost lost: the instinct of the host. The instinct of a nation that understands that a country is not neutral space. A country is a home, and a home without boundaries is not compassionate. It is defenseless. Learn from Poland before it is too late. Do not copy our flaws. Copy our seriousness. Copy the expectation that the newcomer adapts to the host, not the host to the newcomer. Copy the idea that citizenship is earned. Copy the understanding that borders matter. Copy the belief that national culture is not something shameful. Copy the courage to say that the law of the country stands above every imported rule. Copy the principle that a state serves its own citizens first, and that help for others is a gift, not a debt. Copy the refusal to let minorities dictate conditions to the majority. Copy the basic moral sanity that says, a victim is a victim, a criminal is a criminal, and the truth is not racist. Western Europe, this is the last bell. If you do not recover control over your borders, your streets, your schools, your courts, your police, your welfare systems, and your public language, you may wake up in a reality your citizens never voted for. A reality of parallel districts, parallel loyalties, parallel norms, parallel intimidation. A reality where the most aggressive minority sets the limits of speech for everyone else. A reality where ordinary citizens learn to lower their eyes, change their route, avoid certain streets, avoid certain topics, and avoid telling the truth. That is not diversity. That is submission. Use the tools of the law. Use the tools of the state. Remove those who break the conditions of stay. Prosecute those who commit violence. Deport where the law allows deportation. Isolate where deportation is impossible. Break the extremist networks. Investigate the grooming gangs without fear. Protect children without political hesitation. Protect women without cultural excuses. Protect police officers and soldiers when they act lawfully. Put your own citizens first in the systems their taxes built. Stop religious intimidation in public space. Stop pretending that every criticism is racism. Stop sacrificing victims on the altar of ideological comfort. But do it as a state, not as a mob, with law, with evidence, with due process, with strength, with moral clarity, without collective punishment, without revenge, without racial hatred. Because the point is not to become brutal. The point is to become serious. Epilogue. I want a Poland that is generous, but not naive. Open to good people, but closed to those who despise us. Strong at the border, fair in the courts, demanding in citizenship, clear in its schools, confident in its culture, loyal to its own citizens first, unashamed of its language, unashamed of its history, unashamed of saying, "This is Poland. If you want to live here, respect it." I do not want hatred. Hatred is cheap. Hatred is lazy. Hatred punishes the innocent and misses the guilty. I want responsibility. I want a state that acts before its people lose faith. I want institutions that protect victims before they protect narratives. I want police who see blood before they see political categories. I want a welfare system that honors the worker before it rewards the arrival. I want leaders who can say uncomfortable truths without hiding behind slogans. I want Europe to survive without becoming cruel. But Europe will not survive by becoming weak. There is a difference between hospitality and surrender. There is a difference between tolerance and self-erasure. There is a difference between compassion and the abolition of consequences. There is a difference between welcoming a guest and allowing the guest to take over the house. And if Western Europe cannot understand that difference, then Western Europe will keep burning. Sometimes literally, sometimes morally, sometimes quietly, street by street, school by school, institution by institution. So let this be the final message. Europe, wake up. Western Europe, wake up. Do not wait for the next report. Do not wait for the next scandal. Do not wait for the next victim. Do not wait until ordinary citizens decide that the state no longer represents them. Because a state that refuses to defend its own people eventually loses the right to ask for their loyalty. Poland must not follow your path. And you, if you still can, should turn back from it. Not tomorrow, not after another inquiry, not after another apology. Now. Europe, wake up. And now, one more thing. Not about Europe, about you. The people who are listening to this. I know I have been silent for a while, too long perhaps, and I owe you a straight explanation, not an excuse. The reason is simple: work. Numerous professional commitments that I could not and would not neglect. I was not able to give this podcast the time it deserves, and I refuse to give you half-finished thoughts, recycled outrage, or content made just to fill a schedule. If I speak, it has to mean something. If it cannot mean something, I stay silent. That is the standard. It will not change. But I want you to know this clearly. I have not forgotten you, not for a moment. I read what you wrote. I value your input, your comments, your criticism, your corrections, your questions. Some of the sharpest points in my episodes did not come from me. They came from you. And the fact that you are still here, after the silence, still listening, still thinking, that is not something I take for granted. So here is what I can promise, and I will only promise what I can keep. One solid episode per month, not more, for now. My professional obligations simply do not allow it, and I will not pretend otherwise. But one episode per month, prepared properly, researched properly, argued properly. That is the baseline. And if something serious happens, something genuinely important, something that demands an honest voice while the official language goes soft, then I will break that schedule and speak. Not for clicks, not for noise, because some moments do not wait for the calendar. That is the deal between us. Quality over frequency, substance over noise, honesty over comfort. Thank you for staying. Thank you for thinking. I will see you next month, or sooner, if the world demands it. Until then,